All Quiet on the Western Front. Based on a book, the film All Quiet on the Western Front is probably one of the greatest and most tragic, impactful war movies to have ever come in existence. It has for moral that war is devastating, and it takes everything away, friends and foes alike. The movie also shows that there aren't good guys or bad guys in war, but just people who suffer from a careless ideology. Our movie starts with a quiet scene of a foxhole in a forest. After a gruesome fight scene, we are then introduced to Paul Baumer, who is our main character. He and his friends are convinced by propaganda that they will become heroes in war and march on Paris. The boys, Paul, Albert, Franz, and Ludwig, thus decide to join the front lines. After arriving in the trenches, we are then introduced to our mentor, Kaczynski. Things quickly turn dark, however, as Ludwig is killed by a wave of artillery fire on the first night. After an 18-month time skip, we get introduced to Matthias Erzengberger, the diplomat who tries to negotiate peace as soon as possible. The war is thus coming to an end. Meanwhile, Kat and Paul rob a goose from a farmer, and Franz seduce a French girl. We then learn about Kat's family back home, and General Frederick, in search of a German victory, orders an assault days before the war ends. In that fatal attack, Albert and Franz are killed, when the French counterattack with tanks and flamethrowers. Later, on the evening, the armistice was signed, and set to take effect on the 11th of November at 11 a.m. Amidst the celebration, we learn that Jaden is injured in the battle. Unable to support the future of his life as an handicapped person, Jaden kills himself with a fork. Paul and Kat go back to the farm to rob some eggs in the early morning. However, this time, Kat is killed by the farmer's sons. On the same morning, General Frederick, ever seeking a glorious German victory, orders another assault on the last morning of the war. There, Paul, the main character, dies in the assault, seconds before the armistice took place. Pretty tragic, right? Well, that's because All Quiet on the Western Front is a tragic war movie. A tragedy with 3 acts. The first act is the boys getting recruited and getting hyped about the war, thinking that they will march in Paris. The second is the longest and follows the friend group slowly dying one by one in the horrors of war. And then there's a third act, consisting of the last heroic quote-unquote charges, where our main character is killed mere seconds before the armistice is declared. I personally love this film because it's its historical context and what it represents. I'm personally a big fan of history, so I thought that this movie would be an interesting one. After watching it, I would say that this spoke to me more specifically on the emotion side of things, as it's very powerful. I also believe that the story resonated with me because of a major part that is regard to the loss of friends. This is relatable because throughout my life and different changes and troubles that I went through, I too lost many friends along the way, to a point where I often even ask myself what became of these friends. Now, let's go into more detail about the movie, and let's try to find out more about what it actually represents and what it actually has. First of all, the backstory, which in my opinion would be Paul and his friends being students before joining the war effort. I'd also say that the inciting incident would be when the boys, aka Paul, Albert, Franz, and Ludwig, went on to join the front lines and sign themselves into the army. I would also say that the climax is the great battle where both Albert and friends died, and the denouement would be the last great battle where General Frederick, and so for the German victory, sent Paul to his grave. Some key plot points that I identified would be 1. The friend group joining the war effort. 2. The trauma of the first night, the group finding out how horrifying war can be, and Ludwig also dying. 3. The armistice being signed. 4. France and Albert dying in the major battle at the second act. And 5. General Frederick, and so for the German victory, sending Paul to his grave just before the enforcement of the armistice. When it comes to introducing the hero as soon as possible, the film did so in 8 minutes. When it comes to putting the hero in Jeopardy, throughout the entire story, the life of the hero is in danger. In fact, he almost dies next to Ludwig at the very beginning. Our character, Paul, is also very relatable, a happy guy with some friends. We can also see him as a nice person, as after stabbing a French soldier, he feels remorse and tries to save the soldier. He also steals a goose to help his friends and comrades, which also makes him pretty funny. In fact, they also make him very good at what he does, as a very capable soldier, having killed many French troops. The movie also creates sympathy for our character, as we get to see him through the hell of war, and feel bad for him because it's not what propaganda promised him. He's also easily swayed by his peers and pressures them to join the war, which end up killing all of them, which is what give him also flaws and foibles. We also see Paul change, as he goes from a boy who is easily swayed by propaganda, and who thinks he will march on Paris, and to a traumatized war veteran, who sees the horrors of wars in HD. The inner motivations of Paul at the start of the movie would be to march in Paris and go to German glory. But by the end of the movie, his only motivation is just to survive. The external conflict would be Paul and his friends versus the horrors of war. And the internal conflict would be Paul and his mind trying not to go crazy from all the horrors he goes through.